Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now, whilst we are located in Australia, maybe we clear something up in terms of our accents. I am German and have a slight Irish twang to myself, and Stephen is Scottish. So it's very interesting to hear accents from the other side of the world. So we're very excited to hear from you and be presenting today.
Yes, but we are Australians, though, Christiane. We are now. So it's a Scottish Australian, German Australian type thing that we're bringing here.
Indeed.
So let me share my screen so that we can get things going. And first off, before we go, it'd be great if we could have people put in the chat where they're from. Well, not actually where they're from, as in like Scotland, but where they're connecting to today. So what kind of city or state or where country. So we see we've got a couple from the States, a couple more Australians, which is great. So it's the early morning here for us. Well, mid-morning, so 11 in the morning here.
Yeah, a few Melbourneites, a few Sydney people, someone from Cleveland, Auburn, New York. So very international.
I still find it, slightly surreal that we're able to do such things as, present to a group in New York, from my shed at the bottom of the garden in Melbourne, and this is what we're going to be talking about today. This sort of the challenge, the benefits and opportunities that are now here with this different way of working, and as Mindy was saying before, how we believe that this is here to stay and grow and change as well.
Indeed, and I was just talking to my gardener who I said, I'm doing a presentation to an audience in the States, and then I'll talk to you later. And that was very, very funny, sort of this disconnect between, here's my garden and then there's this other world out there. In terms of this talk, we research trends and emerging best practices and what others, are saying and doing with regards to hybrid working and where it's happening. It's an ever-evolving field. So what we're telling today may not be true tomorrow. So that's really the disclaimer here, that this is something that's rapidly changing and rapidly evolving, as it should.
Absolutely, and look, that's one of the elements that we're going to cover. So kind of a very brief high-level agenda of what we're going to be going through over this next hour is kind of dive into it initially, what is hybrid working, and then a bit further onto the complexity of hybrid. And this is the Expert Agile Club, so we're going to talk a little bit about what does it mean for Agile in particular. And then, as Christiane was saying, the future trends. And one of the things with the future trends is that they're coming a lot quicker than anyone thinks. And there's some really interesting things on the horizon that's potentially going to impact even more how we work from a hybrid point of view. And then there'll be a bit of a Q&A and wrap up at the end. Probably a bit of logistics though is that as we're going through, feel free to put questions into the chat, and we'll be monitoring the chat as we go as well. So don't think that this is just going to be one way of us presenting. We're definitely wanting some interaction. We've got some polls that we're going to be putting out as well. So very keen for people to get involved and ask us questions and make this as much of a dialogue as possible.
Yes, indeed.
So what is hybrid working, Christiane?
Yes, what do we mean by hybrid? It took me a while to get my head around that, because it's really a workforce that is blended. So we've got people who work remotely and those who work from an office or, as it says here, central location. And that is really the definition, and that's the model specifically we want to talk about today. There's other remote working models, which is fully remote and or a different way of blending it, but hybrid specifically is this blend between I am in the office part of the time and I am also working remotely part of the time. And that's a particular challenge because it requires real structured thinking about how do you manage an organization and people who are geographically dispersed, and sometimes they are together.
Absolutely, and we're absolutely living through this, and that's why we're wanting to get some initial thoughts of the group that's here of what kind of words or feelings come to mind when you think about hybrid working. So that kind of, that working from home, going into the office some of the time, what does that feel like? What sort of stuff come up for you when you start thinking of hybrid working? So this is also to kind of test that the polling is working as well. So there's a link in the chat that people can use. Or you can use the phone as well, and use the Mentimeter app and put in the code. But so really interested to see what people think. Flexibility, absolutely.
You know, once we've come out of this, or we are still in this global pandemic, you know, we have different perspectives here. We've got scary, we've got freedom. You know, it brings with it change, which can be good, but can also be, I suppose, you know, a hindrance, and feeling like bring up uncertainty around, well, where's this going to lead to, and what does that mean for me and my family and the life that I live?
And your time management is a huge one. You know,
Yes.
Connected to flexibility as well. And you know, I can certainly say, you know, over the last couple of years, you know, this changing to this sort of model has completely changed how I deal with kind of time management, you know, across my whole life. You know, from drop-offs and pickups from kids to you know, just all those logistics of when you do things, you know, around work as well. So I think what's interesting with this is that it becomes that kind of whole of life approach, for good and for bad as well, because there are some scary elements to it as well. One of them being that you're never away potentially. You know, you're always connected, and being able to get that disconnection can be increasingly hard.
It can be very difficult. It can be very grating on mental health as well, and well-being and overall. And but I think, you know, as we talk about a bit later, you know, how does this affect our health and well-being?
So thanks for that, for those responses. And one thing I kind of like to really point out here is that, you know, in many ways, we personally think that we've kind of went through the looking glass in some ways. That what's happened over the last 2 years since the pandemic hit has turbo boosted many things that were already bubbling along for a while, but brought forward a lot of big changes that potentially were going to happen over the decades ahead, but brought it all down onto a very personal level. So, you know, as we all know, it's nearly 2 years ago, which I can't quite believe, but it's, you know, 2 years ago in March 2020, the pandemic hit, and, you know, depending where you are in the world, different levels of restrictions and changing to your working environment, we were all thrown into this experiment virtually overnight, which is interesting because when we were doing our training, Christiane, we were told if you're going to go to remote working, don't do it overnight, make it gradual, you know, build things up. But what happened was we were just all thrown into it.
Yes.
Now, here in Melbourne, we were in, you know, significant lockdowns for most of the last 2 years. We had over 260 days of virtually being confined to, you know, to a 5 or 10 kilometre radius from our house, and, you know, let alone not being able to go into the office. And during that time, obviously, new habits are going to appear, and that's a significant amount of time for those new habits to come together. There's all sorts of research about, you know, how long it does take to create the new habits. But, you know, one example is that, you know, James Clear, who's a famous author from New York Times, it says, you know, 66 days. Once you're kind of getting over that kind of 2 months, then that's when these sorts of new habits will really take an effect. And it's not been 2 months; it's been 2 years now. So those new habits have been really ingrained, potentially even more than that. And James Clear talks about this in his book Atomic Habits, is that it also changes the identity of, you know, who you want to be. I was talking to Christiane about this yesterday of, you know, I just don't see myself as a 9-to-5 office worker anymore. That kind of identity is kind of gone. And because that identity is gone, that North Star has changed, then so many habits that support that are also kind of radically changing as well.
definitely a huge conversation around identity as well. Now, the remote working scale, you may have come across this. This is from Matt Mullenweg, who is the founder of, or CEO of Automatic, whose product is WordPress. So fairly big company, fairly sizable. WordPress is used, as the basis of so many websites. And there's this fantastic interview, there's a link here, that he did about talking about the 5 levels of remote working. And what we find as people, as organizations were plunged into this, hybrid working or remote working due to the pandemic, that a lot of companies are stuck at level 2. And I still see this today in many organizations, even though we're months and months and years into this pandemic. There's still lots of interruptions, lots of meetings, and even more meetings on top of the other meetings. So people have back-to-backs now, literally worn out, and then do their work at night. So there's a lot of productivity anxiety there as well. And so there is, really a case for how do we make this more sustainable in the future, as hybrid working is here to stay, and we're adding more complexity with hybrid as well, because Automatic is actually a fully remote company. Now, if you want to know more about these 5 levels and what each level looks like and how to transcend them, you can download this from our website. There's more information there you can get. But it's just a really, really important one to think about. Well, where are we at and where do we want to go to? Because it doesn't mean you need to go to level 5. You can stay at level 3, and that is enough for your organization.
And there's so many variations that all companies are all different levels, across all different sectors. You can't even say, one sector is going in a certain direction. This is from healthcare to education to utilities to even tech. There's lots of different things that people are aiming for.
Yeah.
What we'd like to know is, so how many days a week do you want to be in the office? So, traditionally we were, most of us, all in 5 days a week. But ideally, how many days do we actually want to be? And it's interesting, the first person who responded said 0. When we first did this, we actually had a 1 to 5 scale. And some of the feedback was, where's the 0? Because I don't want to go in. Right?
I don't ever want to go back to the office. That's right. Yes, and there's quite a few more coming. And that this might not be your current reality. You might have a company that mandates you have to come in 2 days a week, and these are the days we prescribe to you. But really asking you, what is it that you want? What is the opportunity for you here to construct a life and a lifestyle that suits you? Because I think a lot of times previously we haven't had a chance to think about that, because it was 9 to 5 was the accepted norm. That is no longer true. So what does it mean?
Yeah, and it's probably worthwhile sharing. We've ran this poll in a number of organizations, a number of different countries, and even the limited results we've got here kind of echoes some of the broader polling that we've been doing as well. Is that most people might want to go back 2, maybe 3 days tops, but an awful lot of people now are saying 0 or 1. And that's some big challenges for organizations, because interestingly, when we've ran this with some more senior leaders, the numbers are up near the 4s and 5s. So there's also a bit of a challenge of what's going on, depending on where you are in the organization as well. Yeah,
and indeed, very, very few people overall in the curve will be wanting to go back 4 or 5. Like a real bell curve is the 2s and 3s. And I'm really so glad we've put the 0 in there, because you can see, this small audience, it's starting to move. That's a trend we haven't seen before, where people are like, actually, it's never, I don't ever want to go back, which is just,
if you did have to go back, so even the 0s, so if you were kind of said, well, you do have to come back in, what would be your preferred office days? And so within the polling, you should be able to rank these. So if you just put, what would be your preferred day, kind of down to, some of those other days. It's interesting to see, if you are going to go back in,
a big gap.
What days is that going to be? Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's sort of, at the moment, that's sort of Tuesdays and Wednesdays. And
10th week, yeah, and Wednesday is the strongest one.
it's interesting that, you know, that sort of that beginning and end of the week, you know, that's, you know, traditionally that would be when you potentially, you know, the you know, sprints are starting, or you've got your initial team meeting for the week ahead, or on Friday, you know, there's maybe some more social stuff. But
Right.
you know, we see this again and again, that it's that midweek that people want to come in. And the consequences for that, if you think from a logistics and buildings point of view, in fact, even from a society transport point of view, if you've got everyone who wants to come in on a Tuesday and Wednesday, and does that mean you have to still have the same size of office space if everybody's all coming in those days? You know, does your peak rush hours only happen midweek, but actually on a Monday and Friday is more of a weekend timetable? You know, the societal impacts are really, really big when we start to do this at scale. And what we're going to come on to soon is that we really have done this at scale. You know, this is happening worldwide now, and organizations across all sectors. And interesting to see that, you know, that Wednesday is the winner again, Christiane.
Yeah, it is. It is. I can see why. In agility space, anyway. So the sprint start. Right. So there's many surveys out there, and this is only a subset of them. And what I've really pulled out, and over the next couple of slides, is what is it that people want? You know, what have they been searching for? And you can see here the highlighted words. So people are looking for flexibility, and they prefer a hybrid working model. Some people might not be sure what exactly that is, but you can see that that flexible remote is something people want to stay around, and they want flexibility in the hours and location. So if we move on to the next slide, what I want to show you is what's the impact of that. So first of all, 2 years of a pandemic, people are starting to rethink, you know, their identity, what Stephen alluded to earlier, you know, who do I identify myself as a 9-to-5 worker or not? And so there is this, you know, we've been talking about the great resignation or the great shift or the great something. There's lots of trends that are being researched. But what you can see here, that at least, you know, between 40 and 50% or even higher are considering career transitions, changing and rethinking the type of job they want, because now they have the opportunity to do that. So there is really a real shift in the way people believe they want to work. It's like when the 5 days a week work week was introduced 100 or so years ago. You know, we have now another really global shift in how people rethink work and how they approach work and living. It's actually really exciting time to be in right now.
It is, and I think, you know, it's a good point you alluded to there, that potentially this is one of those big change points in, you know,
Yes.
society and humanity. You know, we seem to think that, you know, what we grew up with in the 70s and 80s and 90s and 2000s, you know, that was the norm. But, you know, there was a period, you know, before the Industrial Revolution, and even kind of going up into the late early 1900s, where that really wasn't the norm. And
that's right.
You know, this 9-to-5 office type thing, you know, that was brought in, and quite quickly that became the norm. But maybe this is going to do the same as well. Maybe we're living through one of those moments that's just as epoch changing as the ones that we've been through before, which is, as somebody said before, scary, but it's also it's a bit awesome as well. You know, we're here going, wow, you know, what's going to happen? We're one of these change points in histories, and we're actually living through it, which is fascinating.
It is.
Yes,
where we're going is more complex. Isn't it complex enough already? So you know, the smart companies of the world going, well, where's everyone sitting? So this was a webinar that I attended with Deloitte, and they looked at, well, what are the trends of companies and how they're choosing to work, you know. And so there is some that are virtual first or remaining, and some companies saying, no, actually we want to stay on site. And you can see there's shifts with those arrows that they've tried something and then they're moving to hybrid, and maybe they're moving back. So I'm very curious to see how this would look, you know, in a few years, or in a year's time, or even in 6 months, you know. And you can see there's some organizations, as I mentioned, Automatic and GitLab and Slack, they are just 100% virtual, and sometimes are native virtual as well. So they've never actually had a physical office. So this is in their DNA and how they work. versus others are trying to redefine themselves and say, well, how do we adapt, and what model really works for our organization, for our business model. So you will expect to see some shifts back and forth, I think, over the years until this is settling. But yeah, this is a good view of this.
And you can see, it's not, again, this isn't per sector. It's not like all the techs are just in the virtual and the virtual first. You've got some big players in there. You've got Deutsche Bank and Morgan Stanley and Deloitte and stuff. You've got some serious players that are looking at, well, this is a change in the way that we work. And the big hero campuses that they would have with the big head office, maybe that's not going to be the norm for organizations way outside of the tech sector as well.
And what's interesting, and then if you keep in mind, for those of you that look at the Atlassian where it says hybrid, that has changed. So we'll explain a little bit later. So we already had this is outdated, I would say. It's only been a few months.
And it's only a couple of months, and that's the thing. This is moving so quickly.
Yes. Yeah, so we'll just talk a little bit about how organizations are adapting. We've done some research around that. So we alluded to remote first organizations. We won't talk to them a lot, but we talk about more the early adopters and how other sectors are affected and what they're doing. So remote first organizations, if you haven't heard of GitLab, I really highly recommend checking it out. This is Darren Murph. He is the head of remote. That is a job title, and that he got that job title in 2019. Now, GitLab is an all remote company. They've never had an office, as I mentioned before. But if you want to know what's the gold standard of remote, go and check out their website. Their values are such that they say everything's transparent. So you can get the remote playbook and look at everything. There is a course that I've done, and then anyone can do. It's the Remote Manager course that they offer through Coursera, and it really teaches you an understanding of what does it mean to be a remote or a hybrid organization. So there's a link there when you get the slides of an interview with Zach Sutherland on YouTube. It's absolutely super enlightening, just around how they're approaching remote and how they're working. And I found an article, the next in-demand job title is the head of future of work. So Dom Price from Atlassian had this title of the future of work for years, which always sounded like a very nebulous term, but now it's really starting to change, that people are looking for people with skill and experience, as organizations are looking for that. And there's been a 60% increase in job titles relating to the future of work. So there's a trend here just around, well, whole new industries of work are emerging, and whole new ways of job titles as well. So very interesting area to watch.
Absolutely, and one that we know very well, because it's one of the largest tech companies. In fact, it is the largest tech company in Australia, and one of the most forward-thinking as well, which is Atlassian. And for those that play in the space where you maybe touch products such as Jira and Confluence, well, Atlassian are the company that make those, which have become absolutely huge, especially over the last couple of years. Now, they've had a real culture of experimentation and collaboration going all the way back to the DNA, where they would focus on the customers and employee feedback and make decisions based on that data. The couple of guys at the top of Atlassian are just amazing leaders who have kept this culture that they set up right at the back at the beginning, when they were just a couple of dozen people back 10, 15 years ago, and now they're tens of thousands of employees across the whole world. They've done absolutely amazing. Now, when here in Australia, when the pandemic hit in March, they announced the working from home period straight away for the next 6 months. Now, that was in Sydney, and at that point, Sydney wasn't really in lockdown like we were here in Melbourne. But they went, no, we are locking down for that whole period. And during that period, they launched what they call Team Anywhere. And there's a couple of links which we'll be sending out after this. It's worthwhile having a look at what they did with Team Anywhere, because as it says in the name, it said, yes, you're in a team, but you are from anywhere. And that wasn't just within Australia, that was across globally. They've got these global teams that they pulled together and worked very successfully. But they started to take it even further in 2021. So as the pandemic went on, they made some big decisions, and a lot of the staff were told never to come back into the office at all, back into Sydney. And over a quarter of staff in Sydney, and from top to bottom, cut their ties with Sydney and moved remotely within Australia. these are fundamental shifts when you're actually moving home, moving schools, moving your families. These are, as we were saying before, these things that change the habits. If you're literally changing what town you live in, major changes that are going to be hard to unwind. And just last month, they have doubled down on that, well, tripled down on it, because they've decided to triple the local workforce here in Australia, and they're hiring 5,000 new staff locally within Australia, but locally means anywhere within Australia whatsoever. And I think actually they expand that to Indonesia and New Zealand, as long as you can, because it takes just as long from Perth to Sydney as it does from Wellington to Sydney. Australia is a very, very big place. But they are really, they're tripling down on this and going for it for remote talent across Australia. Just when some leaders here in Australia are beginning to say, hey, isn't it going to be great? We're going to be back face to face soon. Yeah, we've been able to do things on Teams, but or in Zoom, but now we're coming back into the office, and isn't that wonderful? Well, there's some big, big organizations that are saying, well, we've kind of learned from that, and we're going to really go for it. Now, they still do, there's a time and a place to come together. So they've got quarterly meets where they bring people together. So it's not kind of remote all the time. There are some people who do go into the office, but they are absolutely hurtling down this hybrid, and they're a very big player in this space. So really big one, early and fast adopters, and it'll be fascinating to see here in Australia whether the other large organizations like the banks who are fighting for the same talent have to go down this path as well.
Yep, I think what I really want to tie, when we're tying this back to agility, really saying innovation and business agility is the core competency. Atlassian is a company that does that really well, just because of the way they collaborate and communicate with one another, and how they, they're very research and data driven as well, and really interested in understanding their customer as well as their employee, which is kind of like their customer. So the better an organization is that, the faster we're able to actually pivot towards how to do this in the remote world and how to make this attractive, and they're going to hire another 5,000 to 7,000 people, and that is an insane number. But it's what they will do, and globally. Changes to consulting firms. So there's links to that, which I can send out. We'll send out after as well. Some really interesting movements in the Big Four. So they really realizing that the skills shortage, there's especially skills shortage in accounting, but also there's people who, a lot of expats across the world that want to reconnect with friends and family. And, in the past, sometimes your only option was to leave the organization in order to do that. So here's what they offer: remote working overseas for up to 8 weeks, work anywhere in any other country, extended working holidays, and we need to hire, for example, talent into Australia. So they're hiring people overseas who are working into Australia, even though they may not be able to be physically here yet. So all of that is happening. And one of the things I want to caveat here, though, is these are organizations who've had global infrastructure and offices and a legal way to work in other countries. This is not possible, and opens up for every organization. But they have made really wise use of that in order to ensure that they remain, I suppose, have enough people, remain profitable with regards to their workforce. So absolutely exciting stuff here that they're doing.
And these are big organizations that have been around for a long time that are fully embracing this.
Yeah.
But it's not just within those tech firms where you're seeing big changes happening. So in the education sector, massive changes that are going on in education. Obviously, it's such a huge part of going to university, and I remember this well, and sitting in lecture halls just like this. That was the standard part of your day, and also the standard part of your day, going back hundreds of years. In fact, I think Glasgow's one of the first universities, back in the 1400s, and they would have the equivalent of these sorts of lectures, where everybody is sitting around and watching the lecture that's happening. But there's a number of universities now that have now shifted to a very different sort of hybrid model. One being Sunshine Coast University here in Australia and the Gold Coast, where they've decided that all physical lectures are no longer happening anymore. And that was from the feedback from the people on the ground and the students on the ground, saying that they weren't really getting the value from sitting in the lecture hall, where they could be having the same thing coming from a screen or an asynchronous recording, as Christiane was talking about before, of being able to, consume that content differently. But what they really wanted was the face-to-face discussions with their lecturers after the fact. So they've decided, no, the lecture halls are now gone, and we're going to double down on the face-to-face tutorials that are happening, which radically changes what happens, both how the universities operate, but also think of the physical infrastructure. What do you do with these lecture halls now? I mean, do these become cinemas or theatres, or do you have plays there, or do you just bulldoze them down? I mean, it's like there's some big investments that were made here for a long time that are now fundamentally going to shift. So, and Christiane, just in the last couple of months, you've been experiencing this firsthand.
Yes. So I've enrolled in a psychology bachelor last November. So I'm just finishing my first trimester. It's fully online, it's fully remote, all exams. It is absolutely beautiful. It is easy. Everything's recorded. Super smooth experience. I can highly recommend. I wouldn't even go back into university, let alone the travel time I have to endure. No. So this really works for me as a business model, and there's really good learning still. It's good.
But there are challenges and benefits of this as well. And what we'd like to do is to ask some questions. And this is a sliding scale of kind of 0 to 10 of whether you agree or disagree with these. And here, and there's loads of things for us to look at, but here's 3 that we've distilled down that we think kind of point out some of the key ones. And so what we'd love is to kind of get some feedback from the group here of, well, what do you think of these, and do you agree with these statements that much as well? So one of the things that has been raised a lot is that young workers are going to struggle. So if I think about early on in my career, a lot of it was that networking, that initial learning things physically there on the job. It would have been quite different coming in as a grad into a large organization, and not having that sort of physical interaction that was going on. The next one is it's creativity, and I know some people think the creativity is going to be really stymied by not being remote, but there's been a hell of a lot of creative stuff done in the last 2 years, and potentially it levels the playing field between workers with disabilities or with mental issues, and all sorts of different diversity there as well, right? So potentially there's some real benefits in there too.
Definitely.
So, and some and this is interesting, because even just with this limited subset here, this mirrors some responses which are saying it is going to be harder for those young people working from home. Creativity, not so much of an issue, and yes, it is really beneficial to level in that playing field, because we actually took these questions from a YouGov, which are one of the big polling companies in the UK, and they basically echoed exactly what you just said there, that yes, it's going to be harder for young people. So what do we do, right? If this is still going to happen, what do we do, put in place in order to make to make it easier? Creativity, potentially less of an issue, and hopefully this is leveling the playing field and being more diverse. But these are also changing. The thoughts about this is changing rapidly. We've seen a change even in the last 6 months since we've been running these presentations of what the results are going to be.
Yeah, there's always new data coming up. Let's get into what does hybrid mean for Agile, and it's an interesting one to look into. So when you look at a Scrum, and Stephen, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, so when I got into Scrum and Agile, and I was thinking back, my first Scrum team was back in 2006, 2007, big financial organization. And the big thing about it was co-locating people. It's all about getting people out of their silos, physically bringing them together from different parts of the business and different parts of tech and testers, etc., and bringing them all together. And for so many years, that was the big push, was like, get the people who are working on something physically co-located together. But even before the pandemic, that was definitely getting nuanced, because it's not necessarily the co-location is what's important, it's that high bandwidth communication. And high bandwidth communication can be done on many levels, as we've had to find out, especially over the last couple of years. That is really about hybrid bandwidth communication. I still know some Agile practitioners who are saying, no, we do need to go back to that face-to-face co-location, but potentially the benefits of who you can have in your team, if you're willing to be distributed, and you invest in that hybrid bandwidth communication and the techniques and tools to do that, it can be maybe not quite as good, but very close, and maybe good in a different way, because you're the different people that you can bring in.
Definitely. And I think one of the things around high bandwidth is when we go back to the earlier part of the presentation around the level 2 communication, where there is a lot of angst and stress and constant, constant meetings. It's how do we shift that to high bandwidth? And this is, some of the things that we teach organizations, where we help them understand the difference between high contact versus high bandwidth, and what does quality communication and quality engagement actually mean? And so that's where we need to really explore that more. And we've got here the common challenges. We kind of the trifecta of connection. We want to be connected to people. We want to be able to have efficient communication and collaborate for outcomes. And so exploring how can we be more present? How do we build high bandwidth communication, and what tools and techniques do we need to use? And around communication, there's a lot around team agreements that need to be so much more explicit. And how do we create that alignment? And the last one is around collaboration. So modify how we work. How do we have good online events and meetings? So having a quality meeting etiquette and well-facilitated workshops is even more important in the online world, where people are already stretched and in front of a screen all day, and they want to have a good experience. It is simply not good enough anymore to just send a meeting invite and then expect things to happen. You have to do more. You have to be very intentional about facilitation and workshops to get those outcomes.
And in particular, from an Agile point of view as well, around the kind of the standard Agile events, we've all experienced over the last couple of years, how to pivot these. And to be honest, each of these here is probably a whole talk in itself of the different things that you could do.
There certainly is. It's a bigger exploration that sort of, expands past this session. But we want to just really-highlight that you want to ask yourself some critical questions around, well, what if I couldn't do this face to face, or what if I couldn't do this via Zoom or Teams call, and what if I could only do this asynchronously? What would that mean, and how would I need to do that? So it's really challenging yourself and thinking about those. And this is a definition of agility. How do we adapt to a new world and not necessarily hold on to what we know?
And throw in the answers to the questions at the beginning of this, of, well, if people are only coming in on a Tuesday and Wednesday, what does it mean for this as well? Does that mean that you just have these meetings or events on the days that everyone's in, or you don't do it so that they're all remote? Or, there's a lot of challenges. There's an awful lot of challenges within this, and it's an evolving beast as well.
It is.
So the last 10 minutes or so here, 5 or 10 minutes, we've only scraped the surface of what's coming, and we just want to give a little flavour of some of the things that are potentially that are on the horizon. We've already talked about that move to the regions, and that's what's happening here in Victoria as well, where Melbourne is, where last year there was the highest house prices in regional Victoria in decades went on as people shifted. And myself and Christiane know people who have absolutely moved to Bendigo and Ballarat and Bright and other places in Victoria, continuing working for places in Melbourne, but also now shifting into Sydney and Brisbane. But it's happening worldwide. Virgin Money have announced their locationless working, which basically means that you just apply for Virgin Money in the UK, and it doesn't matter where you are in the UK, you go to whatever branch is nearest to you. So, but the jobs are across the whole organisation. So you can get a product owner's job And if you live in Aberdeen, you go into the Aberdeen branch or not and do some of it hybrid. Or if you're in Peterborough, or if you're in Belfast, or if you're in London, it doesn't really matter because they've got the tech set up for this distributed federated system. Fundamentally changing the way society at large. And just, bit of a, I'm still kind of in my head on my holiday that I had last month, but I was camping in South Australia on my summer holidays. But I'm currently going through my organizational and relationship system coaching certification. I would have had to pause that or drop out, but I was able to do it literally from the campsite. And this was my campsite that I was doing it from, which was just fantastic. And to be honest, I was in a better headspace doing it there than I normally am when I'm having to do it working from home. So there are some big changes that are going on within society at large. When we start changing the nature of work, we start changing the nature of society as a whole.
We do. So what's the future of team workspaces? It's in inverted commas, I'm going, well, we don't really know what it is, but what people want is to collaborate and problem solve together. That is and innovate together. That's a real gist of why people want to be together, and apart from social, of course. And so here's what Google's doing. So you've got team pods, and there's this person there who's got collaborating with a whiteboard, and people can be together or they can be remote, but there is an equality here around working things out together. So you see how this is less traditional office, lots of whiteboards. And just a few chairs, but mostly it's about how do we collaborate, and lots of visuals on the walls, which is really where the juice is, and where we work well together. And so this is what Google's doing. And here's another one. I think creating a level playing field here means that everyone is an equal size, and so there's an equal voice. You probably notice when you're on Zoom calls and someone doesn't have their video on, you tend to not notice them as much as people who have their video on, and size matters also. So here building offices that remote people are equally represented, it puts the challenge to organizations to upgrade their infrastructure to make this work well. And that comes with a cost and comes with a remodeling. That is ultimately the way to go at the moment. The campfire space, absolutely love that.
The next generation are coming through, and they're coming through quickly. And this is a picture of my daughter, and I did ask if I was allowed to use this picture, and she said definitely. So that's a bit of a difference with the younger generation as well. And I was reflecting back, that we thought personal computers and then the mobile phones were huge. The Commodore 64, when it came out in the 80s, it was that was going to be the future and changing, and it was. And then the mobile phone. But the generation that's coming through now, their expectations are radically different. This is my daughter Heather. She's on virtual reality headset, and she loves it. And interestingly, she likes it more than my eldest, who's 13, 14. So there's even a difference within those generations that the younger ones just think this is native. And she said to me the other day that she thinks that people who go into the office are just crazy, and she can't understand why people would actually physically go into an office at all. And I think, Christiane, your daughter said something similar to you as well.
My 17-year-old, she's challenging, my life in that way. She said, why would anyone work 9 to 5? It sounds like death. And why would you want to go to the same place every day? And, so it's just, they don't find that particularly exciting. And here's an opportunity for them to shape it, and for us to be shaping it as well. And, what does work mean? And what does being productive actually mean? And that doesn't mean a 9 to 5 job.
Yeah. And look, and what is coming next is going to be big. And the big tech companies, they are pouring tens of billions of dollars into this. And just 3 quick examples. You've got Facebook, which is going with the metaverse, and whatever you think of that, and potentially it's not where it's going to be, but they spent $10 billion on it last year, and they're going to spend the same and more this year and the years to come. There's stuff that's going to come out of that which is fundamentally going to change things. Interestingly, Microsoft aren't going for the full virtual reality, they're going for augmented reality, and they've got this thing called Mesh, which is the collaborative mixed reality platform, which is fascinating. It's a bit kind of more Minority Report, if you remember that movie. And their developer preview is now out as of the last couple of weeks, where you can sign up and you can start playing around with this. And then you've got Starline, which Google is looking at, which is a bit more of a point focus, but what they're looking at is a 3D hologram, full-on Star Trek type interaction, and potentially the changes that that's going to bring. And we've got just a couple of minutes left, and I'm just going to play a very quick 60 seconds of where Google is going with this. Just to kind of give you a flavor of, well, you think you know what hybrid is now, well, potentially, there's going to be even bigger changes coming very, very quickly. So let me go to...
So imagine instead of looking at a screen, you're looking at a magic pane of glass. And through that glass, you're seeing another person on the other side.
Hi, can you see me? Say hi to Auntie. Oh my gosh, I love you.
Eddie! So, you look beautiful.
And then you just start having a conversation, just like you would if you were physically together.
Like, I feel like you're here. This is wild. I can see that curl in your hair. I can see how your sweater is falling. Yeah. But then you'll be saying, put on a little lipstick, Maury.
There are really three breakthroughs coming together here. One is the ability to capture people as they are. The second is the ability to compress that information and send it over existing networks efficiently. And the third is the ability to render that person viewable through a three-dimensional display. So it really feels like you're talking with someone right in front of you.
We see this as a first step at applying technology to solve that really important problem that we often want to be together and we can't.
Don't say goodbye. Don't go away. That was mind-blowing.
I've seen a lot, but I've never seen this.
I felt like she was present, and I felt like I was present in that moment, too. It was like she was here.
Bye.
So a bit of future sci-fi, just to kind of wrap things up, that while we might think things have changed a little bit just now, wow, there's some amazing changes that are coming and coming down the track.
There's even more, like this is the whole market of virtual real estate and non-fungible tokens, and people having virtual real estate to meet in Zoom. So there's like the next thing that's even there. It's already out there. That people, I just read an article this morning for someone bought a penthouse in virtual reality to host their guests and their Zoom partner. So much out there that is emerging, and technology is making it happen, and also how people want to work. So yeah, there's some cool stuff there. We've got a request to share the links to the video. So after this, we'll make sure that we share the presentation as well as the links.
Yes, and look, that's just a very little touch of the future of work, and so it's been a very quick 50 minutes, and we are kind of open for any questions that people would that this might have brought up, or any thoughts. Hi, Mindy.
Hi. Yep. Feel free to unmute or type your questions in the chat box, however you guys are most comfortable doing your questions, however you guys want to as well. Yep, go right ahead. Looks like we have a couple questions.
Cool. Alberto, got your hand up.
Yeah, good morning. It's actually 1:54 a.m. in Lagos, Nigeria.
11:54 a.m. in Melbourne, Australia. So yeah, we're all in different times. Congratulations to you being awake at this time. It's one of the drawbacks of localization, isn't it?
Well, it's good. It's good. Without the online stuff, I wouldn't have had this beautiful insights and information. First and foremost, I want to say a very big thank you. First to the organizers, Expert Agile Club, and to you guys for finding time to share your wisdom and knowledge with us. I'm very, very humbled. From the last video that I saw, seriously, it's mind-blowing. Very mind-blowing. The challenge today will be that a few organizations will only benefit from that that technology really, because in Africa, I can tell you, for a lot of people came to terms to know about Zoom during COVID.
Yeah.
They are used to being in traffic. Till date, you still have technology company in Nigeria where the MDs, and I mean leadership, they don't support remote work. They want everybody be in that traffic. You spend 6 hours of your life out of 24, you're in traffic. And I don't know really, it's challenging. And it's killing also, because once you wake up, okay, normally here, we'll wake up around 4:30 a.m. to start preparing. 5 a.m. past 5, you must leave. If you don't leave before 5:30, you're in trouble. You're going to actually spend 2 hours plus in traffic, which for me is not very helpful.
Do you know,
it reduces our lifespan. It puts a lot of pressure. You're already on pressure before you even get to the office. So you can imagine the state of mind already.
Yeah.
Right. So this is going to also put a hole in our. When I say I'm talking from where I am now, catch up to technology, because if getting organizations to invest in technologies to support even the remote that we are talking about is challenging. You can imagine this virtual reality. That means it will take at least 10 years again for people to start catching up. And that puts us in this part of the world further behind, because we are actually playing a catch-up. Thank you very much, really. I am really grateful.
No problem. No, and look, more than happy to chat afterwards on what you were saying. If you want us to present into Nigeria as well, we'd absolutely love to. And one thing I'd like to call out, which we didn't actually say, and I think it's something that we should potentially add in, is that there's an equality of access for this. Things are moving so fast that both within countries, but between countries and between continents, there is an inequality that's happening here. So that ability, we're talking about, this hybrid working, which kind of relies on, well, if you've got a good broadband, fiber network that's in the country. And there's many countries that don't, and so there's an inequality that happens there. On the other hand, I was talking to a friend who's in Bangladesh recently, and they're actually skipping what we went through more in the West with the copper phone networks. They kind of bypassed that entirely, went straight to mobile phones and wireless, and they don't have that legacy infrastructure that they're fighting against. But you also call it a really good point of the attitude of leaders and how important that is in order to embrace some of this. But there are big trends now that are happening worldwide that are going to help nudge or kind of force people down at least some variation of this path. And I think it's up to us all, and thanks, Mindy, for allowing us to speak today of, well, how can we help people across the world in order to properly embrace this?
I think you made a really good point there, Alberto, just around what Stephen alluded to, the infrastructure. And I think the other part is that they want people in the office because there is a perception of productivity when people are approximate to you. And so there's a lot of research that's been backed up to say that people are actually more productive. As you said, when you don't have to commute for 2 hours, you can actually use that time and be in a better frame of mind. So I think there's so much scope there to explore that further and in around, well, what does productivity mean, and also how do we ensure that there's trust on both sides, that outcomes are achieved and that people are working with their best intentions. So it's certainly a two-way street as well, and that's something that needs to be further explored, and certainly we see here in Australia as well, just around what if I don't see this person, then I don't know what they're doing. So how do we get around that? And it's certainly something to unpack more.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
You're so welcome. Yeah, what does productivity means for leaders? Yes, and it's about outcomes, not hours spent. Yeah, so there's very, very different conversation, but probably another talk as well, which I think is a really worthwhile one to explore. Yeah. So we are at time. If there's no other questions, you're so welcome to contact us and also connect with us on LinkedIn. You'll feel free to also reply to Mindy. She will send through the slides. So, and we make also some of the links available that are part of our research, what we found. And so hopefully we'll hope that this is valuable to you and that you'll get some value out of that. We've also got in our slides at the end a special offer for you if you do want to take up one of our hybrid working courses that we offer to help teach people some of the actual practical skills that we've talked about. You know, you're welcome to look that up on our website, as well as Quoting Expert Agile, and you will receive a special discount from us. Because we would love to help you out. We'd love to help you out in future, and we would love to see how we can, you know, help your organization to embrace agility and hybrid working at the same time.